In those rare, still moments when the house falls silent and the lake outside lies as smooth as glass, it's then that he comes back to me most clearly. The scent of cedar, mingled with a hint of mint, lingering in the air. The way his eyes would meet mine from across the room, or the soft hesitancy in his voice, as though he spoke with a quiet reverence whenever he addressed me. Harlan Moss was an unexpected spark, an impulsive indulgence in a life I had always tried to live with caution and care. And now as I sit here reflecting on that memory, I can't help but think that, for all the shadows that came with it, there was a certain beauty too. I had been living my life as I always did, neat, predictable, and controlled. Alistair, my stepson, had come for the weekend with his friend Harlan, a young man whose name didn't even register at first. They arrived at the house, arms full of groceries and gear, filling the air with their laughter and the clinking of bottles. Alistair, now almost 40, had grown into a quiet, thoughtful man, carrying himself with the same composed demeanor as his father. Our routine was simple and familiar. My relationship with Alistair grounded in a mutual, unspoken respect that had developed over the years. So, when he brought Harlan along, I thought it would be just another weekend. But that all changed with a single moment. One that still stands out in my mind, vivid as if it happened only yesterday. I was alone in the house, or so I thought. I was indulging in a rare bath, allowing myself to unwind in the warmth and scent of lavender. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching. The door creaked open and there he was. Harlan. His face flushed deep red as he stammered an apology, and for the briefest moment, our eyes locked before he quickly retreated. My heart raced, and in that raw moment something shifted. That was the first spark. An ember lodged deep inside my mind, one that refused to fade. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just an innocent mistake, but as the days passed, I felt a strange curiosity stirring within me, a restlessness I hadn't felt in years. I found myself watching him more, noticing the way he moved with a carefree energy, that natural confidence he exuded. What struck me the most was how he didn't treat me with the polite distance most young men might offer a woman my age. His gaze met mine with something akin to admiration, quiet, almost reverent, and it flattered me, though it also made me uneasy. That night sleep evaded me. I lay in bed, replaying that brief moment over and over, lingering on details I knew I shouldn't remember. The rise and fall of his chest as he caught his breath in surprise. The color of his eyes, dark forest green, gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. The next morning I hoped I could brush it off, pretend nothing had happened. When I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, Alistair was already at the table, bent over plans for their new project, while Harlan poured himself coffee at the counter. For a brief moment our eyes met, and there was a fleeting exchange of recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement of that shared moment. My cheeks flushed, and I quickly turned to focus on preparing breakfast. Seemed absurd. I was 72, a woman who'd lived through enough hardship to know better than to entertain such thoughts. But there was something about Harlan that stirred a long-buried part of me, a part one thought I had left behind. Over the next few days I found myself observing him more, studying his every move with a level of attention that surprised even me. He'd laugh easily, his carefree enjoyment evident as he and Alistair joked around, something I found as foreign as it was captivating. When he spoke, he had this way of leaning in, making the person he was talking to feel like the only one in the room. It was a small thing, but it made me feel noticed in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, Alistair stepped out to take a phone call, leaving Harlan and me alone in the dimly lit den. He was quieter than usual, his usual exuberance replaced by a more thoughtful, introspective silence. After a while he turned to me and with a shy, almost innocent smile said, "I hope you don't think I'm being too forward, but I really admire how you carry yourself, Mrs. Ashford. It's rare to meet someone with such poise." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt an unexpected thrill. There was something in his gaze, a warmth and openness, that was both flattering and dangerous. I managed a small smile and replied, "That's kind of you to say, Harlan, but please call me Daisy." His smile widened, and for the briefest moment, I felt my heart flutter. A reaction as unexpected as it was exhilarating. Our conversation slipped into a rhythm that was comfortable, but charged with a quiet tension. Harlan asked me about my work in art history, and I found myself speaking animatedly, sharing stories of my travels across Europe and the masterpieces I'd studied. Over the next week, Harlan kept coming around, always under the guise of working with Alistair. But it became clear that his reasons for being there went beyond just work. Our interactions grew more frequent, almost ritualistic, an exchange of glances, a lingering touch, a shared laugh. One afternoon, while Alistair was in his studio, Harlan and I found ourselves alone in the garden. I was tending to the roses, carefully trimming the blossoms, when he quietly approached, not making a sound until he was standing beside me. "They're beautiful," he said softly, gesturing toward the flowers. "But they don't compare to you." It was a simple comment, almost innocent, but it carried a weight neither of us could ignore. I felt a rush of excitement mixed with guilt. I was old enough to know better, but something about Harlan seemed to break down the walls I'd built around myself. I met his gaze, and for the first time I truly saw him. Not just as Alistair's friend, not just a young man full of potential, but as someone who saw something in me that I thought had long since faded. The moments between us seemed to stretch, filled with a silence that was both tender and charged with something else, something electric. At last, I broke the quiet, my voice little more than a whisper. "Harlan, you don't understand what you're saying." He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and the softness of his touch took my breath away. "I know exactly what I'm saying is sold," he answered, his voice calm but full of conviction. "And I think you feel it too." In that moment, a flood of emotion surged through me. Exhilaration, fear, desire, all colliding inside me. I knew better than to think life offered many second chances, and even fewer that didn't come with a price. But for the first time in ages, I felt truly alive, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself roaming the house, my mind restless with thoughts of Harlan. I ended up in the den, staring out at the dark lake, the moon casting a silver sheen over its surface. I heard footsteps behind me, and when I turned, there he was. Harlan. His expression reflected the same inner turmoil I was feeling. We didn't speak, but the silence between us said everything. In that quiet space, away from prying eyes, we allowed ourselves to cross a line we'd been circling for so long. He stepped closer, his hand gently touching my face, his thumb tracing the lines life had etched into my skin. There was a reverence in his eyes, an awe that made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't in years. When he leaned in, his kiss was soft and hesitant at first, as though he feared breaking the spell. But as our lips met, all my doubts and fears melted away, replaced by a sense of freedom and exhilaration I thought I'd lost forever. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Alistair, not the years between us, not even the life I'd so carefully built. The only thing that existed was the two of us, suspended in time, lost in a world of our own making. In the days that followed our first kiss, I found myself torn between exhilaration and guilt. Every time I looked into Alistair's eyes, a pang of betrayal hit me, a reminder of the boundaries I had crossed with his friend Harlan. Yet each glance, each secret meeting with him, seemed to pull me deeper into this impossible affair. The affair wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quietly consuming, like a fire slowly smoldering beneath the surface. Harlan would visit, often under the guise of work, and each time, it felt like a precious secret, a gift wrapped in silence. There was an art to our deception, an exchanged glance that lingered just a little too long, a fleeting touch that sent warmth rushing through me. I became skilled at keeping my feelings hidden, smiling when I wanted to laugh, making comments that hid the depth of what I truly felt. Harlan, too, seemed different. The casual ease that had once defined him now carried a quiet intensity, a kind of unspoken passion that seemed to fuel every move he made. He would look at me with that knowing gaze, and it felt as though he could see through all the masks I had ever worn, straight to the part of me that had quietly longed for something more. One weekend, Alistair had to go to an architectural conference in the city, leaving Harlan and me alone in the house. The anticipation between us hung thick in the air. Each moment felt like a song we both knew by heart. That evening we shared a quiet dinner, the only sound being the soft clink of silverware and the rhythm of our breaths. When we finished eating, Harlan reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine that we were more than just two people caught up in a fleeting affair. That maybe in some world I could love him openly without the weight of secrecy or guilt. Isolde, he said softly, his eyes searching mine, I can't keep this a secret forever. I want to be with you. Really be with you. His words hit me with a clarity so sharp it felt like they stripped away all the illusions I had built to protect myself. I wanted to believe in the life he was offering. A life where age and circumstance didn't matter, where we could be free to share ourselves fully. But reality was always there, casting a shadow, reminding me of the life I had built, the family I had created. This wasn't a world where a woman my age left everything behind for a young man with nothing but promises. I took a steadying breath, gathering my thoughts. Harlan, I care for you deeply, but you know we can't have a life together. Not like this. His face fell, the hurt evident in his eyes, but he held my gaze with a resolve that sent a shiver through me. I don't care about the rules or what others think. I know what I feel and I know it's real. Can you say it's not? The question hung in the air, a challenge I wasn't ready to answer. I could deny the depth of what I felt but not its truth. The life he was offering, though painfully unrealistic, called to a part of me that was starving for freedom, for passion. Our once secret affair began to seep into my daily life. I found myself sneaking out at odd hours, meeting Harlan in quiet corners of town, places where we could simply exist together without fear of judgment. Each meeting became bolder, riskier, and each moment felt like a stolen piece of happiness, a joy tempered by the constant fear of being discovered. One afternoon we met in a secluded park on the edge of town. The trees cast long shadows, offering cover for our whispered words and lingering touches. As I looked at him, framed by dappled sunlight, I realized just how far I had strayed from the woman I used to be. This affair had become both an anchor and a burden, a source of joy but also unbearable risk. But in that park, with Harlan's hands gently cupping my face, the fear disappeared, replaced by something deeper, a sense of resolve. This wasn't just a passing passion. It was a connection that had slipped into my life and changed it forever. I couldn't deny it any longer. Harlan, I whispered, pressing my hand over his. I don't know where this will lead, but whatever happens, I need you to know you've made me feel alive in a way I never thought possible. He leaned in, his voice a soft murmur brushing against my ear. Then let's stop hiding this, Isolde. I don't want to be just some secret. The promise in his words hit me like a wave, and for the first time I allowed myself to entertain the possibility that freedom might actually be within reach. But as we pulled away, both lost in our own thoughts, my gaze caught a familiar face from the corner of my eye. It was Alistair. He stood just a few feet away, his eyes wide with disbelief, his face twisted in hurt and betrayal. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me as the full weight of reality hit me. That evening Alistair confronted me. His voice was thick with anger and pain. He had always been my constant, the son I had raised and loved as my own. Seeing that raw hurt in his eyes felt like a physical blow to my chest. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice trembling with a fury I had never seen in him. I was paralyzed, unable to speak, each word stuck in my throat, choked by shame and guilt. Finally I managed to answer, my voice barely audible. Alistair, I never meant for this to happen. It wasn't planned. Just happened. He laughed, then a hollow bitter sound that sliced through the silence. It just happened? You've betrayed me. You've betrayed everything we stood for. The guilt was unbearable, a weight that almost crushed me. I wanted to explain, to make him understand that it wasn't just about Harlan. It was about something deeper, something that had been missing from my life for so long. But the words wouldn't come. They were useless. They couldn't mend what had been broken. That night Alistair left. His parting words were sharp and final. I trusted you, Isolde. I looked up to you. And now, I don't even know who you are. In the days that followed, I was left alone in this house. The place that once felt like home now felt cold and foreign. Every corner a reminder of what I had destroyed. Alistair cut me out of his life, and Harlan too distanced himself. His life, tainted by the scandal of our affair, became as quiet and withdrawn as mine. Silence became my only companion. The echoes of my choices haunted every room. I wandered aimlessly through empty halls, wishing there had been a moment, just one, where I could have made a different choice. I began to understand that this affair wasn't just an impulsive act. It was a revelation, a brutal awakening. In Harlan I had found a freedom I hadn't known I needed, a glimpse of a life I thought I'd lost forever. But that freedom had a price and I was paying it dearly. The weeks after Alistair left were marked by suffocating silence. The house, once vibrant with life, now felt barren. The rooms were heavy with a quiet that seemed to weigh on my soul. Each corner held a memory of what I had destroyed. In the mornings I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, cradling a cold cup of coffee in my hands, lost in thoughts of Alistair's last words. "I don't even know who you are," he had said. But the truth was I knew exactly who I had become. A woman who had wandered into dangerous waters, chasing something I couldn't name, something to break the monotony of a life I had always kept tightly controlled. Every day felt like an endurance test, each one heavier than the last as I faced the consequences of my decisions. I wanted to reach out to Alistair, to beg for forgiveness, to somehow make him understand. But every time I reached for the phone, the words evaporated. What could I say to heal the rift I had caused? As for Harlan, he too had pulled away. Though he tried to stay in touch at first, his messages grew sparse, and his visits ceased altogether. I could feel the weight of our shared guilt. His youthful energy, once so vibrant, was now dampened by the shame of what we had done. I hadn't intended to shut him out entirely, but the sting of Alistair's betrayal had created a gap that seemed impossible to bridge. And if I'm honest, I wasn't sure whether Harlan's presence would bring comfort or just deepen the shame gnawing at me. Desperate for normalcy, I threw myself into old routines, hoping to find some peace. I went back to volunteering at the local art museum, spending long afternoons cataloging exhibits, my hands moving without thought while my mind wandered back to that day in the park, when Alistair had caught us. The pain was sharp, and it cut deeper in Harlan's absence. I missed the warmth of his touch, the sound of his laugh, the way he had made me feel alive again. One afternoon, I decided to clean out the attic, hoping that the physical labor would distract me from the suffocating weight of my own thoughts. As I dug through old boxes and forgotten relics, I found a photograph of Alistair and me from years ago, taken on the front steps of the house. He was smiling, his arm around my shoulders, his face full of that youthful admiration that felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there staring at the photo for what felt like hours, tracing the edges of his face with trembling fingers. Looking at that moment from the past, it was strange to realize just how much had changed, and how much I had changed. I stared at the photograph, feeling as though I was looking at someone else. Someone who had once been certain of her place in the world. Someone who had followed a set of clear rules. That woman had vanished the moment I allowed myself to fall for Harlan, replaced by someone I barely recognized. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang. My heart skipped when I saw Harlan's name light up the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. "Isolde?" His voice was soft, unsure, and hearing it stirred emotions I thought I had buried. "I wasn't sure you'd call," I replied, my voice thick with something I couldn't name. "I wasn't sure I would," he admitted, a touch of sadness in his tone. I don't want it to end this way. I can't stand the thought of you feeling alone. I know what we did was wrong, but it wasn't meaningless." There was a truth in his words that I couldn't deny. Our affair, reckless as it had been, had awakened something in me. A part of myself I thought I'd lost. A reminder of who I was, of the dreams and desires I had buried under years of careful restraint. I wanted to tell him all of that, to express the depth of what I had felt. But the words failed me. "I don't regret you, Harlan," I whispered, the words trembling on my lips, "but I regret the pain we caused." Silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. Finally, he sighed. "I understand. I wanted you to know that, for whatever it's worth, you meant a lot to me." The call ended, and I was left in the quiet darkness of my room, the phone still humming softly in my hand, the weight of his words lingering in the air. As the weeks passed, I found myself questioning everything that had brought me to this point. The love I had found with Harlan had been beautiful in its way, a rare, defiant connection that transcended age and circumstance. But it had also been stained, marred by the hurt we caused Alistair, by a betrayal that could never be fully undone. I started to wonder if this affair had been a way for me to escape the suffocating monotony of my life, a desperate grasp for something I didn't even know I needed. Harlan had shown me a world where I was still desirable, still capable of evoking passion. But that glimpse had come at a cost, one I now realized was too great to bear. One evening as I sat by the lake, watching the ripples shimmer in the fading light, I understood that forgiveness, both from Alistair and for myself, would be a long and painful road. But it was a road I had to walk. I had spent my life carefully crafting a respectable, upright version of myself, bound by duty and honor, and in one reckless moment, I had unraveled all of it. I knew I needed to reach out to Alistair to offer an explanation if not an apology. The damage was done, but perhaps there was a way to begin healing, a way to mend the fracture I had caused between us. I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and started to write. Dear Alistair, there are no words that can undo the pain I've caused, nor can I justify the choices that led to my betrayal of you. But I want you to know that my actions were not out of malice, nor a disregard for our family. I was lost, searching for something I couldn't name, and Harlan was simply there, offering a kindness I hadn't realized I needed. This letter is not a request for forgiveness, though I would be grateful for it. It is simply my way of telling you that I am deeply sorry for the hurt I have caused. You are my son in every way that matters, and nothing, not even my mistakes, will ever change that. With all my love, Isolde. I sealed the envelope with a mixture of hope and dread. I knew there was no guarantee he would respond, no promise that he would find it in his heart to forgive me. But it was a step toward healing. In the end, the affair became a painful chapter in my life. Harlan, though no longer part of my present, remained a quiet presence in my memory. A reminder of a love that had been real, even if fleeting. He had left his mark on me. A reminder of the woman I was before everything had changed. Though our paths had crossed briefly, it was enough to leave me with something I hadn't expected. Life eventually returned to its quiet rhythm, the scandal fading into the past, but the lessons it taught me remained. And as I sat by the lake watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a sense of acceptance for the journey I had taken, for all its twists and turns, knowing that I had walked through it and come out the other side forever changed.